So, it's now been a while since the most recent Contrapoints video, and I watched it. And I wrote out a response at the time, which I was going to record, and then I got sidetracked, and then I decided I didn't want to, and now I finally decided I do, so I'm just going to read what I wrote, basically. There's not going to be too much more to it than that, but I'll comment at the end. So I watched the Envy video, and I was struck by something that she said, which was that envy gives no pleasure. And I thought about that, and I realized that's kind of true. And I started thinking about the so-called 7 deadly sins. And they say all the sins are rooted in pride, because they all come from believing that you're better than everybody else, and that you should control things and have things. And that's what makes pride special. It's sort of at the core of all the others. And I guess each sin has its unique descriptor, and pride is the source of all the other sins, and envy is the one that gives no pleasure. And I can't help but think that's because, unlike the other sins, it's about wishing you could it's about wishing you could replicate somebody else's moral failings rather than enjoying the spoils of your own. But maybe that's just because envy is a stand-in for the other sins when you can't have them, because you are, amongst other things, flat broke. Which is not quite my current situation. Well, it basically is my current situation. I don't know, I'm just living on credit cards. I am broke. I'm not completely out of options yet. Anyways, she also mentioned this whole Freudian business of competing for mother's milk, which is in some ways more basal, haha, I don't like the whole MILF thing, I can't stand it. But in her discourse is a strange and almost fetishistic stand-in for what we really compete for, which is our parents' wealth, resources, and social capital. That's another reason envy is the sin that gives no pleasure. It's the one that truly makes you realize the tragedy of all the others, which is that they can come at the expense of another living, feeling thing. That's also why there's this strange desire to serve as the karma police, which wraps envy and wrath all together, with pride, of course, like always. I think that's what Natalie does, and sort of built her YouTube career on, and it's certainly what I always feel like doing, is being the karma police, although we should have a more sophisticated model for how we interact with one another. And my experience is it's a very bad idea to try to serve as the karma police, because karma will promptly spin right around. Anyways, I keep adding to what I wrote before. That's what I think Natalie does. But yeah, she finally just basically went and said that her audience was bad for wishing that they had what she has, and that they're all just envious losers. And, the algorithm hath ordained that she shall beeth influential, and so it must remain. You see, I think there's something insulting about celebrities and influencers constantly going, oh, you don't want this, and then doing everything they can to advance their own fame. It would be one thing if it was like, oh, yes, I'm going to go pursue, but no, they always do that while they're continuing to increase their own fame as much as they can, and it's exactly what she does. It must needs be remarked, though, that I do exactly the same thing with reckless abandon. It's just that, I don't know, I'm still the underdog. I don't have any success yet, so I can still be like, haha, and be somewhat consistent. I do envy Natalie's power and fame and influence badly, though, because I am proud and I think I would do a better job with it than she would. But I would also get insta-canceled if I were famous, so this is all well and truly senseless, and I don't know why I waste my time on this. That brings me to my point, though, which is that I envy the thing that's really worth envying. Power. Power is, by definition, the capacity to alter the course of events to make outcomes that you find more desirable, more likely. It's hard to get more direct manifestation of that than literally being known as an influencer. Envy always seems to involve envying another sin, and to me, you might as well go directly for the core of it, which would be pride. All the others are ways you might attain power, but they can backfire. Gluttony will help you grow big and strong, especially in a pre-industrial society, but it can also make you obese and slow. Greed can obviously benefit you, but will generate endless misery for you and for others in its wake. Wrath can ensure nobody will dare betray you, but will ensure nobody wants to befriend you either. And pride is woven into all of them, like I said. And, well, I saved lust because, well... Oh, sorry, I also forgot to mention my personal favorite, which is sloth, because it is indeed a problem, and people's laziness with regards to some things, particularly cough cough, social progression, for example, a content creator whose entire platform is built on that and who now is spending exactly this much effort on that. I do think people are valid to criticize her for that. Yeah, it's just a valid criticism. What can I say? And she doesn't know how to handle criticism anymore. She's not a very good philosopher, not a very good content creator, and I don't like her anymore, and I'm annoyed with her. But of course, I want her to go back to the good version of her. I don't want to just insult her for no reason. I want the good version of her back. But anyways, my favorite is sloth because it's such a great antidote to all the other sins. It's like... yeah, gluttony, but I'm out of potato chips at 1 a.m. Why bother getting more, you know? And yeah, I'm greedy, but working, yeah, why bother, you know? And so I'll you know, say that sloth is not good, but if greed is good, sloth is awesome. Excuse me. Excuse me. I would not call sloth awesome, though. I would just call it less destructive than greed. Anyways. So I enjoy that one, but I've been putting off talking about lust because, well, that ties into something I think about a lot, which is, and it's uncomfortable to think about, evolution. But, well... I should really explain. There's more to life than having biological children. But that is why we exist, and it is, I guess, well, what most straight people want, and most people are straight, and that's why we all exist today. But in my mind, trying to compel somebody who doesn't want to reproduce is well and truly senseless, because a lot of human history has been a struggle to survive, and that's just, you know, and to reproduce, so it's kind of idiotic. I don't know. So, there's that. A disturbing amount of human history, though, and an even greater but somehow less disturbing amount of our pre-industrial evolutionary lineage consists of a brutal struggle to survive. Like, lust is the desire to reproduce, and we've learned to use it for other purposes, good and bad. We can use it to validate our social relationships, and that can be a good thing, but it can also be a very dark thing that leads people to feeling entitled to sexual access to other people's bodies. That's what's so alarming about a place like Texas or Alabama, by the way. They're bringing back the incentive for one of the worst things a human being can do to another, and I mean, they're really bringing back the incentive for it, which is a horrifying thing to think about, and I don't think anybody's destiny is determined genetically. But there is a horrifying... it actually is more of a psychological than a genetic incentive, but it's pretty horrifying, and that's what scares me the most in some ways. I don't want to get into it too much. It's a terrible, terrible situation. I basically want to accuse people in Texas of, like, setting that system up on purpose because that's how they want to, like, manage their social system, is through this, like, I mean, there's a reason they call it, like, R-word culture. Anyways. Alright, so that brings us back to envy. Why is it so miserable? Is it because, unlike the others, there's no way to satisfy it, even temporarily? Well, you could certainly try wrath, but that's a distraction, not a cure, although it does feel great sometimes. It's because envy is based on fear. In fact, in the original Greek of the Bible, the word is that is leap, which means that doesn't seem very Greek, which means, but it means despair at another's good fortune, right? And I think that gets much more to the core of it, because that's what's problematic is why are you upset that somebody else is happy? And I think that gets to the core of both the idea and what Contrapoints was talking about. Because she mentions the difference between Squidward and SpongeBob from SpongeBob SquarePants. And you see, it's not that Squidward wishes he had what SpongeBob has. They have the exact same thing. It's that Squidward is upset that SpongeBob is happy. And the way Natalie explains it, though, were as if the envious resentment of Squidward were just some random pitfall of the human psyche with no cause whatsoever. And I have a different take. You see, just like all the sins, envy is the toxic, awful version of an emotion that our ancestors had an incentive to feel for some reason, right? And sometimes those emotions help us, like when our impulse to tribalism reminds us to care for each other and our communities, but it can also turn evil in a hurry, like when our impulse to tribalism makes us hate anybody different from us, right? So where does envy come from? Well, that's obvious, you say. You have an incentive to want other people's stuff, to covet. That's just it, though. Natalie addresses exactly this question. She points out that that's the incentive for greed, not envy. So, want stuff for yourself, and in fact want more than you need, sure, but why be upset that somebody else has something? Well, the obvious answer is just if there's a finite amount of stuff and somebody else has it, you can't get it. It's no longer up for grabs. Or up for crabs, you could say. But, well, that's certainly part of it, and our brains just haven't evolved to catch up with the abundance of a post-industrial world. But it seems like most of the things people envy aren't really things that have any tangible benefit. They're things that if anybody else had, you wouldn't even want. They're things that really confer status in society. And status in society gives you power, and what people really envy is power. So why be envious and not just desire it? I'll argue greed is really a desire for power too, because you can't eat money. And in some cases, envy, I think, with power is more obvious. Like, in a democracy, there can be another state with more electoral votes, like I live in New Mexico and Texas has more electoral votes, and I'm envious of their electoral votes, because I'm afraid of what they're gonna do with them. And so in the Contrapoints video, in the case of Contrapoints, I don't really envy her that much. I mostly just wish I could get out ahead of her because I'm greedy, and I saw how successful she was at being a grifter, and if I could be a more successful grifter, I could have even more money, and I'd be really happy with that. But in her case, by and large, our incentives are aligned, so I'm not that afraid of her, so I'm not that envious of her. And that brings me to what is probably as close to a thesis as my response to her envy video has, which is envy, more than any other sin, is rooted in fear of our fellow human beings. All the others are rooted in pride, and they're all rooted in pride, but the others are all sort of rooted in a mistrust of the forces of nature and things that might just go wrong by random chance, versus envy is fundamentally rooted in mistrust of each other. Right? Which, if that seems too abstract, consider this admittedly a contrived example, which is your neighbor has 100 guns and 100,000 rounds of ammunition, and you have 1 gun and 400 rounds of ammunition. Would you be perfectly happy if you were just, hunting deer and rabbits or whatever? Probably, yeah. But in light of the fact that they have 100 guns, you're like, okay, I'm really uncomfortable right now. So that's not an example that's likely to come up, but when you combine money and healthcare and a bunch of other things, you start to get some things that are vaguely like that. And it's easy to forget a lot of people who lived in human history died before they could have children, often because they died as children. And we're lucky to live in a world where we can reasonably expect to survive to adulthood. But there is a looming fear of crises like climate change, making that so that even in the developed world, that is not necessarily a guarantee. And certainly in the developing world, it could be very, very, well, it's currently not a guarantee. And yeah, And so anytime that might happen, there's a deep-seated fear. It's also well-founded that the rich and powerful are accumulating their wealth and power so they can build their own personal shelters rather than directing resources towards actually preventing the crisis in the first place. So likewise, the old money, rich and powerful, envy someone like Natalie because, well, they're afraid of her because she's an upstart, And I'm a bit envious of Natalie's influence because I would take the conversation in a slightly different direction. But again, our incentives are reasonably well aligned, so I'm not that envious of her. Okay, and so finally, I want to address what she says about envy and revenge. Because she says envy and revenge are... She says envy and revenge are the slow, simmering replacements for retaliation. And I'd say that's semi-accurate. Retaliation is an immediate response to an attempt to do something contrary to one's own goals. You kill my friend, I kill your friend. Retaliation. But then you hone your skills and prepare to come kill me in delayed retaliation. And so, you see, retaliation is an attempt to resolve the situation with the current state of affairs intact. I killed your friend I'm going to say I killed your friend because he was about to kill me. That's what I would say. And what you would say is that I just had it out for him, right? And so then, but then you kill me because you know that I just killed your friend and therefore I can kill. Okay, so it's, perfectly, logical. But let's say, I have a gun and you don't. Well, you're not going to, if you're smart, you're not going to come at me now. You'll get revenge later. And, those of us that are, civilized, quote unquote, but, nevertheless, do not seek personal revenge, right? If we are wronged, and we are wronged in a way that violates the laws of the society we live in, we attempt to find recourse in the court system. And if you do not have privilege and status, you don't really get to do that. And that's kind of why we have inequality. It's one of the many reasons. But, anyways, revenge is about waiting until the circumstances favor you, right? And retaliating is about demonstrating that they already do. But in both cases, you could just let it go. Which is why I find it so comical, or rather, I would be funny if it weren't so sad, that she just straight up endorses, not the worst version, but a pretty She endorses a version of Nietzsche's philosophy that I find rather disturbing. And I think she's going in a very bad direction. She even goes so far as to basically endorse the whole master morality thing. Not quite, but alarmingly close. And if she's doing that, something's wrong. And I found that pretty off-putting. And she's basically saying that beta cucks plot revenge while alphas lay the beat down then and there. And there's something horrifyingly Might Makes right about all that, in my opinion. It's true there's something awful and malignant about holding someone's past actions against them, but there's something even worse about grabbing up every cookie in the cookie jar and then suddenly insisting on the values of moderation after you have everything for yourself. So there's something cruel and ironic to me about content creators making it to the top and then promptly explaining why everyone else's ambitions to do the same are bad. I don't want revenge on Contrapoints, though I'm sure there are people who do, which is ridiculous because she's a YouTuber, not like a terrorist. And I don't want to envy her either, and that I certainly have none. I envy her all the time. But, I guess what I want is what I've always wanted, to have more influence than her. I don't begrudge her success, but a part of me wants to get out ahead of her. And I know I'll probably never be more famous than her, but I am very clever, and maybe I could be happy with the good things she does and run interference on the bad things. I don't know. I'm just a fellow traveler, Nat. But SpongeBob and Patrick actually burned down Bikini Bottom on multiple occasions. But to be fair, so did Squidward, because, well, it's a cartoon. Thanks for watching.